Thomas. Einen wunderschönen guten Abend. Hello, everybody. I started in German as it is a special event. I pushed the right button. I was luckily to find the brand section after my mentor, Thomas, guided me and was the enlightening light and guidance which I needed not to fool around with an uploaded version of our intro song. And after we had that part of technology and we agreed last time that artificial intelligence could have helped me here, it was the human in the loop who saved my ass as Thomas gave me the guidance. This is now the exact point where I bridge over to our special guest today, Graham Hill. Welcome, Graham. And it's a friendly hello again after we have had you last year for a session. And we found out that times are right to talk about some really strategic and basic stuff, such as get your things right, get your things in the proper way. And in our chit chat before we went live, we had the finding that history and behavior is somehow repeating itself in the attitude how people are operating their databases and their CRMs. I would like to give you an opportunity, Graham, to introduce you to the audience, as not everybody knows you from LinkedIn or from your former life where you have been an editor in Customer Think, and you have been extremely active in the years from 2000 till 2015, if I recall right, also as an editor, writer, and regular poster, blogger, engaging person. So tell a bit about yourself, please.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. So, where to start? So I've been doing this sort of work for a long time. I think that's the key thing to say. So I've been working in the CRM space, service quality space, marketing, CRM, and related topics, whether that's data, communications, or other elements for around about 30, 35 years now. Started out at British Airways a long, long time ago, doing operations research, and moved into the consulting world, which I've been doing for the last 35 years. Worked with 30 big corporations around the world over the last 30 years period of time on decisioning programs and marketing automation programs. And of course, the topic for today is CRM. So I've probably been doing CRM for 25 years now. And it keeps going round and round and round. We have more channels, we have more communication types, we have more complexity today. It's the same old thing. And you know what? We're not getting much better at it. And often I think every 10 years people come in new into the CRM space. And they forget about all the things we learned previously. So today's session is all about getting back to some of those basics about how to get CRM right and how to bring the customer into the heart of your CRM. It's C, after all, in CRM.
Yeah. It's lovely, and it is a cool perspective we're going to take, such as I'm a strong believer that if you focus on the individuals which are paying your bills, you can learn a lot, perform a lot, and do a lot of stuff right and not wrong. And there we come into the topic of uncertainty. Your perspective on what's going around right now. Where do you see the most challenges for the different sizes of companies, Graham?
Okay, that's a very timely, very good question. So people increasingly talk about living in a VUCA world, volatility. So things are moving quickly, uncertainty, nobody knows what's going to happen. Complexity, so which I think is actually complicating us rather than complexity. So lots of moving parts, and whatever A stands for. Okay, what's that say? Remember what A is? Whatever. Ambiguity. I think. Ambiguity.
Okay.
And in this VUCA environment, we've just come out of a COVID recession, a COVID-induced recession. People were not allowed to travel. People were not allowed to shop, depending where you live, of course. Not allowed to go shop in person. People's habits changed. Digital increased radically as a consequence. People's buying behavior changed. Whether it stays that way or not is a different question, of course. We're quite ingrained in our habits. And in this uncertain environment, this VUCA climate, that often, I think, rather than trying to move faster, it often pays to go back to look at origins. Understand who the hell the customer is, what do they want, what are they trying to get done, what are their jobs, how do they measure success. Look at what you're offering customers in terms of your products and your propositions and your communications, and trying to find a better way to bridge a gap between the two. A lot of our CRM today is still about products and companies rather than about customers and their jobs to be done. So finding that bridge is, in my view, one of the best ways we can actually work towards removing some of that uncertainty, that volatility, that complexity, and that ambiguity that is increasingly a part of business today. Just go back to your original point, though. Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, famously said, customers have all the best ideas and they have all the money. So if we want to take some of their money, we've got to help them to facilitate some of their best ideas.
And the back to basics idea, you find me very often discussing with Marshall, the American version, where I go with the German version of the core experience. If you go to a week's market on Saturday and you find the friendly ladies and the friendly gentlemen which are serving you and delivering you fresh food and selling you all the good stuff, or you have a small little shop around the corner, the mom and pop shop, as Marshall told me, my Tante Emma Laden is called these days in the Americas, where I experience the 7-Eleven, such as in around the clock, you get a service, you pay a little extra, but you get the stuff you need. Yeah.
Yes.
And I believe that we should come back to the attitude of knowing about our regularly coming customers, but keep open in our vision and in our listening ability for the needs of spontaneously dropping by, or if we are in the online world with pandemic restrictions and all that stuff, that we have to find a way to communicate online with unknown guests and potential customers. There is the core where a CRM system could serve and could help. And advocating going back to the roots, do you think that there is a certain need for a little shishi, or where would you say should one start if he decides now, like thousands every day might probably find the way, okay, now I need a database, now I need something to get structure into that mess.
Sure. So I think it's a good comparison. So we all like the idea of the corner shop or the market stall, where you're competing with others nearby. And if it's a market stall on a weekly shopping market, a Wochenmarkt, as you would say, at where you're from, then you have a whole lot of people come together. They offer similar goods and services. You have to compete on something. It's not going to be price because you'll have similar prices. So you're competing on the range of your products, and you can reach on the friendliness of your service. People can come to you, and if they like, you'll come back again next week and the week after that. Develop some sort of relationship with a person this time. And that works nicely, providing, of course, the products work fine and the pricing is okay, and so forth. When I get beyond that small stall or corner shop, or even small to medium-sized enterprise to larger corporations with, rather than 100 customers, I end up with 1 million customers or 10 million or 100 million customers, then that same mentality, that customer centricity, I think is important. But you can't know all the customers individually as an individual, as a person. You can't have a personal relationship with them. So you need technology to help out. And that's always been the case. It's nothing new.
Yeah.
So you start to pick up databases and all the paraphernalia of CRM, which is where we started. If you think back to the 1980s, we had TESS and term, which is Gartner's term, I think. So technology-enabled selling and technology-enabled relationship marketing. And those relationship marketing and selling came together to become early generations of CRM. But it's all technology and all about data. If you think about it, that worked fine, and we did a lot of stuff around database marketing and all the stuff around selling, and also service as well. Was the poor relation, but over time, people started to realize there was more to it than just marketing, creating demand, selling, fulfilling that demand and service, picking up pieces when things went wrong. It's actually about the customer experience. It's about the end to end, from I have a need, a category need. So what's in the marketplace, all the way through to post-service when I want to disperse a product and take on something new, or my circumstances change. So we end up with customer experience added on as an additional thing. But what hasn't really changed is that need to be able to communicate with customers. So for me, CRM is about, or CRM strategy is about how you're going to organize to communicate with customers to create value. Now, primarily, that's about value for you as a corporation, but it also needs to be value for the customer as well, because if you don't give them enough value, they'll go somewhere else. So it's always going to be a balancing act. So the work I tend to do these days around CRM strategy and CRM is about having to bring the customer into those corporations, not into the database, always been there, but a customer-centric element. And of course, we have new tools today. We have tools like Jobs to be Done, created by Tony Ulwick at Strategy and Clayton Christensen at InnoSide. That help us to understand what is the customer trying to do, not what they do, what are they trying to do, and what are their desired outcomes? How do they measure success? These become a much better foundation for CRM than just having a catalogue of products and trying to work out who we're going to communicate with our annual communications plan, which is great, works, and will achieve the results you're looking for. It's particularly customer-centric. And of course, we have to remember that things are changing. So the world is changing in terms of CRM from a world driven by campaigning, annual campaign calendars, and monthly campaign pushes with one particular product or service or whatever it may be. The world has got digital now, so you have a whole lot more channels. But it's also got, and the future is going to be much more about in-mode changes. So I notice your behavior has changed while you're using my product, something we've not really spotted in the past. And that can trigger a communication of some kind, ideally to help you get whatever you're trying to do done, which is why you've got a product in the first place, but also to sell something as well, or to build a relationship, or to ask for market research. This whole new world of in-moment as well as outbound and inbound, which we've always had in the past, is where things are moving forward in the future. And that needs a new way of thinking about things. That needs to bring the customer inside CRM. It's not only about databases. It's never been about our relationships. Customers don't want them, basically, neither with companies nor, and don't have them with most of your products either. And there's plenty of reason to show that's the case. But it's about customers and managing customers. And that's where CRM today is about what we should have been doing 20 years ago and 10 years ago and 5 years ago. But we still struggle with it sometimes to a certain degree, because we're obsessed with technology and data rather than obsessed with the customer.
Right. We're still trying to sell to a customer who has already done their research, which is a bit of a mistake.
Yes and no. So I think that's right. So in an ideal world, so in the real world, 99%. So the Ehrenberg Bass Institute in Australia, they talk about B2B marketing, and John Dawes, one of the professors there, talks about the 90-10, I think 95-5 rule. That 95% of communications, when you communicate to your customers, they are not in the B2B market. Now, I think with B2C, 99% of your customers are generally not in the market when you communicate to them, because you're talking about things that they're eligible to have, rather than things they would like to have that are suitable for and they desire. So there's a whole new way of thinking around this, built around what we would call category entry points and mental availability. Again, think from Eric Gast Institute. I was trying to think about how do we use our brand to create a strong sense of mental availability, so that rather than going to search on Google or Amazon or Bing, now powered by AI, you search in your head. The things that you already know should be part of your consideration set. And of course, the ideal way to do that is to be a satisfied user of a product or service from a company over many, many years. And then it's automatically, do they have one of those? Rather than what have I seen recently, so the branded element of mental availability, or a search activity on Amazon or Google, or as I said, now using Bing AI as a different way to do things. So if you get those things right, then you start to be talking to customers when they are in the market. So rather than 99% failure rate, because you're talking to customers at the wrong time, you have a much higher success rate because you're talking to customers when they are in the market. And that means being able to get at spotting signals that customers are in the market and acted upon the appropriate.
Right, the digital body language, as we called it.
Say again, Marshall.
The digital body language, as we used to call it.
I think so, and we have a lot of data back. There's no question about that. But it's what I call the 4 C's. We have data about the customer themselves, but it's who are they and where do they live. We also have contractual data. What do they contact of their contact data? When did they talk to us, or when did we contact them? And obviously consumption data from using our products and services. What we really need is that contextual data, the stuff that they know, that stuff probably on their handset, but isn't in your database, because we live in our handsets these days. It's that contextual data about who am I, what am I thinking about, what am I trying to get done, what's my current context and situation. If I can identify that as a data source, that contextual data, then have a strong chance to be able to talk to the customer when they're in the marketplace about things that are relevant for them. Again, driven by this concept of category entry points. When do they come into the marketplace? And how do we identify that? This is relatively new thinking over the last 5 to 10 years.
I would like to share with you what Tony put in his comment, such as the technology should give you insights about which customers are in addressable markets, obtainable market or markets, and what is in their situation and how can we serve them. And now the
there are the dogs.
already advertised sounds of the friendly dogs is with us, and this is important, such as now where you could get your favorite dog food and your favorite dog biscuits. And we go back to Tony's question. Graham, what do you think about it?
It's an interesting point. So before I get to Tony's question, so part of this building a working relationship, because not a real one, but a working relationship, is about trust. So we have a brand of dog food we buy for our dogs, and we've been serving this dog food, and they really like it for many, many years now. When I tried to buy direct, I was presented with a whole long list of third-party data collectors who I don't know about, who I don't want to give my data to, and who provide nothing of any value to me at all. So what do? I choose not to buy from this particular company directly. I buy via Amazon, because I trust Amazon more, despite knowing what Amazon does, that they do this literally list of more than 100 third-party data collectors that I do not trust and I know will not interact in my best interests. So, trust is important, and that brings us back to data, what Tony's trying to ask about. So, as Tony says, it is all about identifying who's in the market is addressable. So, do we know who the customer is? Do we know what they're trying to do? Do we know where they are in their purchasing cycle, if you like, certainly in B2B, but also in B2C to a certain extent as well? And then if we understand their situation, their context, if we have the right products, offers and propositions to match that particular circumstance, then we're able to do business like you've been able to do in a corner shop if you've got things in stock, Because of course, if you have a corner shop, people know what you've got to stock, so they come because they know what you've got. It's quite a little bit different in large corporations. But if we have that balance, then we can achieve something that works for the customer. They get their help with getting their jobs done, and it works for the company as well. They get help selling something which helps match the customer's need. That's the start of a working relationship over a period of time.
And I would like to thank you, Tony, for your question. And you see, we are actively sharing your thoughts with our expert and discuss it, which comes to the point that I'm a big fan of getting into the challenge of data quality and what is collected. And as you said, trust is important. And I say quality is as important as if we use the data we have been collecting, we would like to have a certain knowledge how good that data is, how useful it is, and how it is helping us to take the right decisions. And we do have a lot of, put it politely, smelly data around us, which is no good at all. And we make our strategic decisions on it with machine learning.
I think that obviously it goes without saying that high quality data is a foundation for all analytical work, all decisioning work, and obviously all operational work. The yardstick that I've always used over the years of working closely with data and data analysts is that around about between 0.5 and I think it was 0.5 and 2% of your data decays on a monthly basis. So in other words, becomes unusable. And a lot of databases are full of ancient data. I mean, technically speaking, if you look at it, certainly within Europe at GDPR, without obsolete data, you have no legal reason to keep it at all. If there's an audit, the ICO in the UK or other data authorities might take a dim view of you having all this data that you have no legitimate reason to keep and is no longer useful for you anyway, other than for things you have to keep for financial or other purposes, historical data. So I think it goes without saying that high quality data is really the foundation of a lot of this work. But of course, the key part of that is timely data and relevant data. So there's no point going back to our mental availability and reaching out to customers. No point having data that is of relative good quality. Doesn't help me make a decision right now about what to do with a customer. And again, this is like I said before, a move away from the idea that everything's done by planned campaigns a year in advance. That's always going to exist, at least in the foreseeable future. But because it's going to be always on stuff, a trigger occurs, or an event occurs, and we respond. And that increase is going to be spotted change in the customer's behavior, and then we use that to drive a communication of some kind, ideally to help the customer get their stuff done, their jobs to be done, and their desired outcomes. But it can also be, and probably will start with, being a product sales push of some kind.
I would like to share the question from Tony on strategic segmentation and what your take is on that one. And he also added that it is a huge issue too, on his perspective, and that company talk about going to one-to-one approaches, which I honestly like, but it is a bit tricky how to handle this. And if we go for smaller organizations, I find it even more tougher.
No question about it. So I think Tony's exactly right. So if I have millions of customers, then I'm going to need to do some sort of segmentation. However we do that, in order to be able to create groups of people whose behavior is similar.
Yeah.
And that's the foundation to create matching product, services, and experiences. We don't always want the same things, and our expectations change over time, albeit slowly. So a strategic segmentation will help us to identify and create services and products and experiences designed to match what they're looking for. In the olden days, we were not using psychographics, demographics, sociographics, and other various forms of data. But there's a great an image I saw a little while ago of a picture of two men, similar age, both live in castles, both born in the UK, a whole load of other characters, loads of money. whole lot of identical characteristics, except that one was Ozzy Osbourne, the famous singer, and the other was King Charles. So similar, demographics, but completely different people. Today, we wouldn't use that sort of approach to segmentation. We'd probably use, ideally, we'd use a jobs-based approach. So we'll look at customers' jobs to be done across the whole marketplace or our desired marketplace. And we'll identify groups of customers with similar jobs to be done and similar desired outcomes. That becomes the foundation for successful segmentation and obviously persona generation. But it's driven by the idea of what people are trying to do, activity, rather than human. So we go into an activity-based design approach rather than a human-centered design approach.
Okay.
And the design guru, Don Norman, wrote a few articles a little while ago, criticizing human-centered design. There's emphasis on people rather than emphasis on what they're trying to do. Focus on what they're trying to do, their jobs to be done, their desired outcomes, not on the people themselves when you're doing a segmentation. And so I think, Tony is exactly right. Without that, you can't really start designing products and services. And his other point about treating individuals on a one-to-one basis, this was Pepperson Rogers' famous work, and I think it must be 20 years ago now almost. And they're for me, still the best definition of CRM. So treating different people differently.
Yeah.
That Pepperson Rogers' original definition of CRM, for me, still spot on. That's okay if you have highly modular products and highly modular content communications that you can mix and match in real time to give Marshall exactly what he's looking for and Ralph exactly what he's looking for. But most corporations don't have those things. They have big, chunky, monolithic products, and they have chunky, monolithic communications. So you can have this or not this. Through this communication, which you're going to offer to you, but not a whole load of variety of different personalized communications. So that one-to-one vision, legitimate as it is, I don't think it's possible without modularizing products. And I know some large corporations are recognizing that their core businesses, telcos, for example, or banks, are recognizing that their product, their core business, albeit profitable, is highly competitive, and everybody's offering the same things more or less, excluding the disruptors. So they're recognizing that you start to need to offer a broader portfolio of products and services and experiences through third parties, often through multi-sided market platforms. And that's what drives a lot of this new thinking around unbundling products and unbundling communications and rebundling using technology in real time. But again, it's great and works really, really well, but the customer's still missing. So when I create my next best action, or including a customized product, customized offer, with pricing and so forth, and what have you, it doesn't help much if the only criteria I'm using to select a customer to receive this next best action is, are they eligible for the product? And I ignore, is it suitable for them? Or is it desirable for them as well? The chances of having success are quite low again.
And I just had the envisioning when we came to the segmentation part that it is useful if one takes the job to be done and combines it with a certain momentum in the customer life cycle, so to be said, or when he is from his social demographics developments. If you were solo, then you got a girlfriend, then you marry, then you have kids, and at a sudden your sports car is not the suitable machine to run any longer.
Sure.
Need a different car.
Yes,
and the segmentation to do so sounds to me as a very valuable approach, as you suggested that an organization, independently of its size, should have defined, separated CRM strategies and contact strategies in place to be prepared. Could you elaborate a bit more on that one?
So that's, I think 10, 15 years ago, right, when I did a lot of CRM strategy work, then there'd be a CRM strategy, which is how we wanted to manage customers using communications. But I think we moved on from that part, that view, driven by technology and driven by a different view of the customer, it's also driven in some cases by recognition that everybody doesn't want the same thing, the jobs to be done, segmentation type view.
Okay.
So what I today say is that different groups with something to do. So let's say you own credit card in a bank, and your job is to sell as many credit cards as possible, which means I need to get people informed that they exist. I need people to apply. I need people to activate their credit card. I need people to use it for the first time. I need people to become their main credit card, and all those sorts of things. Part of what you would call the product life cycle, the product pathway.
Yeah.
I can define all of those things as a bank, and I can communicate with the customer accordingly around, because I know who's in the marketplace, and I know who's applied for a card, and I know who's signed on, and all those sorts of things, and I can move them through that product pathway. But at the same time, the customer's got a credit card for a particular purpose. So I might have a credit card to act as a short-term loan, as an alternative to becoming overdrawn or having an overdraft, as an alternative to take out a short-term loan. So understanding the customer's circumstances will help me to not only manage my product pathway, but also to manage the journey the customer themselves are on, which is going to be different to our product pathway. They don't live in the bank, they don't live in what we're doing, or a telco, whatever. They have their own stuff to do. And they might have multiple products with us and competitors at the same time as well. So my job in CRM in some ways is to understand what I've got to offer and understand what the customer's looking to get done, their jobs and their desired outcomes, and to find a way to match those things together. So in the past, we would have had one CM strategy. Today, if I'm looking at a credit card or mortgages or small loans, for example, household loans in a bank, each one of those should have their own CM strategy, which is how they're going to communicate with their customers to create value. And what happens is now we have decisioning technology that take the next step. So beyond all my multiple CM strategies, that creates a marketplace of communications. Everybody competing to communicate with the customer, but we can't communicate with the customer all the time. In fact, I saw a survey last week by an SAP company, and in it they said they asked customers about communications and marketers as well. 20% of customers did not want to have any communication of any kind from companies. None. Only 0.4% of marketers believe that was the case. So you have a massive, when you add it all up, more than 50% of people didn't want any communication other than either not at all or once a month or once every 2 to 3 weeks. So not much at all, compared to the often hundreds of times that we communicate with our customers, which they lightly ignore, or worst case, they go blind, or worse than that, they opt out of marketing on the GDPR Article 21, or whichever article it is. So part of this is this matching process. So having created a multiple of CM strategies, a marketplace of communications, then I need to be able to wait to decide what's the next best thing to do. When I'm going to say, well, do I make a credit card communication, or do I make a mortgage credit communication, or do I make an engagement communication to build the brand, or do I do a market research communication? And then a step beyond that, then I think about contact governance. How do I ensure that those communications, albeit the best one at this moment in time, doesn't damage the brand because we've talked too often to the customer, doesn't damage the customer because, well, actually, you're at the start of another journey on you just bought a new credit card, and it's sending mortgage communication because it came out with the highest value, eligibility-wise, but actually it's not the right thing to do, and doesn't destroy finances by people take too many discounts at the same time, or whatever it may well be. So we have those three things: CRM strategy, creating opportunities to manage customers' value. The marketplace will make decisions about what's the next best thing to do with the customer. And then the contact governance afterwards, make sure we don't do silly things inadvertently while we're keen to go to market. And that's where we are today. And all of it is driven by technology. Without technology, you can't do any of these things.
Yeah. So uncertainty, and if we want to be agile enough, calls for a certain set of preparations, calls for to be having something prepared in a drawer, or to be more technical, to have a defined journey prepared for the dedicated job to be done, and the different customer approaches to address to. And another thing I take away is that we have to think about the balance in the flooding on information. If we have recipients which want to be on an island of don't touch me, don't talk to me, leave me alone. They want a certain kind of isolation till they point up their hand and say, now I would be ready to communicate. How then to make...
That's a good point, isn't it? So this goes back to our mental availability and category entry points where we become eligible to enter a journey of some kind, a shopping journey as they would describe it in the literature, in order to be able to get some support to get our jobs done. That balance, I think, is really important. So we tend to over-communicate to customers because we think they want it. They don't. Some of them do, but only to a small minority. I don't forget seeing in a meeting in a telco with a marketing agency in a marketing meeting. And I'm a marketing man by heart. And I love marketing, but I love good marketing, not crappy marketing. And we're sitting in a meeting, and a lady stood up and said, I know we communicate with our customers up to 400 times a year. People looked around the room at each other thinking, 400 times a year. But then she said, the hammer statement, but it's not spam because they don't complain too much. So I'm thinking to myself, that's what I actually said. They're sitting in a meeting in a major telco in the UK, and a lady from one of the ad agencies said that. And I'm thinking to myself, well, no, maybe they don't complain too much, but maybe they just switched off. We know response rates are often quite low. If digital is much, much lower than still the best response rate for direct customer communications, direct mail, followed by email. And then all these are an order of magnitude worse off. Because often it's cheap and easy to do, but it's not relevant. The Wharton School ran a marketing 2020 program a few years ago, looking at the future of marketing and advertising, and they came with this RAVES model about what's good communication. It's relevant, actionable, it's valuable, and it's exciting for the customer. That desirability, that suitability element again, and it's shareable. It's so good, I want to tell other people about it. We started using similar models like the RAVES model from the Wharton study to think about how I can, what's the best communication to make. Our comms would be much better. Instead, we focus on efficiently getting things out of the door. People are eligible for communication. Rather than is it suitable for them? Do they want it? And will they actually tell everybody else about it? It's not rocket science.
Yeah. Talking about rocket science, Tony, our dear friend, is back and gave a hint such, going back to the segmentation approach, there's not one for all. So which approaches you are suggesting or you made experiences with in combination have found to be suitable for the different approaches?
That's fine. So it's a very good question, and I know Tony well, and he asks tough questions, and so he should get more insightful answers. So as I've mentioned before, I favour, of all the things I've tried to look at over the years, the approach I favour for the front end, so just working out what it is we want to be doing in the first place, what products, what services, what experiences, communications, then I would tend to use a jobs-based segmentation approach. So we look at who's in our marketplace as a whole, because we need to define our markets, who we're going to be serving, who we're not going to serve, identifying what they're trying to do using jobs-based analysis approach, do some prioritization work, you get a nice graph out of that, an opportunity matrix that looks at importance of a job and satisfaction. Most things are appropriately satisfied and in terms of their importance. Some things are overly satisfied, and we can look at opportunities for disruptive innovation. Some things are undersatisfied, but are really quite important. They're the sweet spot of innovation to create new opportunities. Most of it's just about incremental improvements. That's great for creating new products and services and having stuff in the drawer ready for you, assuming you've got some sort of modular approach, product design, comms design. Yeah. When it comes to the back end, and I'm much more interested in looking at a dynamic, multi-dimensional, not two-dimensional, multi-dimensional approach to segmentation. I'm looking for people with certain characteristics that I can use to be able to stitch together a standardized, a mass customized product from components and a mass customized communication in real time using technology to do the heavy lifting in order to be able to communicate to the customer. And that's where, a lot of organizations talk about personalization, big banks and telcos and airlines and car companies. Often they talk a lot about it, but it isn't necessarily implemented within their organizations. So working with one organization recently, only 5% of their communications were personalized. That is that real-time interaction management part. And there's something we haven't talked about, which I probably won't cover today anyway, which is if I think about CRM as being able to personalize communications in real time, driven by contextual information about the customer, and as far as possible, a real-time constructed product offering, proposition, and communications, then I need to be able to stitch those interactions together into a coherent journey. So real-time interaction management is great. So personalized marketing is great right now. But what about things that have happened recently in the past? Shouldn't we take into account of those? Where do I think the customer's trying to get to? What's their job to do? How do they make success ultimately? I can help to get there fast. It's better. And that's the job of journey orchestration, journey analytics. So we're now add J and journey analytics and journey orchestration to real-time interaction management, personalization. That's a really tough job because you can't do journey orchestration until you become pretty damn good at real-time interaction management. Because you build upon those capabilities you've developed in order to be able to create Joe. And when you want to go beyond journey orchestration to actually wrap meaningful conversations with the customer into those interactions in the journey, conversational commerce, as you might describe it, it needs to be pretty excellent at RTIM, pretty decent at journey orchestration. Otherwise, your conversations would be rather one-sided, rather like our communications are today. Buy this stuff. That's not much of a conversation. Question.
Yes, as I was thinking about following the idea to have the journey orchestration in my hands and knowing that I have only two, is it suitable to get there a little help from my computer and my software, such as not only the human in the loop, but also the man in the machine is helping me a bit to get a certain balance between guidance out of software and what I do. What is your advice here?
Mr. and Ms. Artificial Intelligence?
This is like somebody's PhD now you're describing. We've had tools to help us for a long time, haven't we? We've had analytical tools and selection tools in the olden days of direct marketing, the good old days, the 1980s and 90s. The tools have always been there, and without modern technology, I mean, the 900-pound gorilla, the Pegas of this world, that people should be using and using to their full, the Adobes, the Teradata's, and what have you, the SaaSes of this world. Without these tools, you can't really do a lot of technically competent personalized marketing or next-best action. Forget about journey orchestration and conversational commerce. They depend upon technology, but I think a lot of the mistakes that corporations make is that they think if I buy a large tool, then the job's done. And then the vendor will try and get it implemented in 90 days because that's the 90 days rapid implementation cycles that they have today. They want to get out of the door so they can say, yeah, we did it in 90 days. But you have this amazing technology, but you haven't built all the complementary capabilities, the processes, the other data you need to be able to collect to feed into it, the other technology you need to be able to integrate into, the new roles and responsibilities, how you collaborate with your colleagues, the values and the high performance of work. You need to make all this fit together, and of course, governance that goes with that. You need to build these things out, and it takes time. So there's work by Eric Bernofson at MIT, for example, looking at the so-called J-curve, where we know that products can suffer from you start on a really small scale, you can get a lot of return relatively quick. It's all under your control. You're up that. You're a hockey man, so you're up the front end of the front of the hockey stick. As you expand into more larger parts of the organization, you get right down to the bottom where you've got all the costs but none of the benefits because it's all too bloody complicated. It's only when you start to build out your complementary capabilities that you get all that additional enablement that gets unlocked from the technology and you start to become really profitable. And we know from Benson and others' work, that can take up to 10 years before your new tech, we understand all the other things we need to build at the same time, we get all the value out of that tech. So in a new world of, obviously AI is not new, we've had it for machine learning, it's not new, we've had it for a few years now, and we've now got ChatGPT and large language models as well. It's going to take some time before we start to work what all those complementary capabilities are we need to be building, those other things that are not to do with technology in particular. We build those things out so we get the max value out of the technology we bought. Especially like in ChatGPT, so large language models, where it's relatively new. We know it is flawed in many ways. I read an article the other day that suggested it won't, because of where it comes from, Silicon Valley, that it won't produce results that might offend somebody, particularly American perspective. A little bit alien to us Europeans, or less so these days, but there's a whole load of things we need to be developing. So, and that brings up to your point of we need these tools to support us.
Yeah.
So, in the olden days we had humans in control, HIC, and now we have humans in the loop. So humans are doing the key decisions, but technology is helping us to make better decisions. And I think that's often where we are today. And over time, as we learn what good practices look like and we automate best practices through process automation, other forms of automation technology, then we end up, the humans go out of the loop and they're only there for exceptions. When something strange happens, what do I do? PDCA, SDCA in terms of process improvement in Toyota. And obviously, ultimately, it's humans out of the loop compliantly, hootle, as they would say, where the thing runs out in a lights out fashion. We don't really need to get involved because it's been so well understood, it's been fully automated, that machines can run all the things themselves. So two things come out of that, obviously. One of those is the easy thing. We're in this evolutionary life cycle. My beliefs were relatively at the beginning, was where machines provide support for humans to make decisions. They're good at spotting patterns. We're not very good at that. They're not so good at making decisions necessarily, except for simple decisions. So they become a decision-making aid. The humans are making choices, and as I said, over time, we start to automate things to become best practices, and then we can move out of the loop to except for exceptions. Now, there's another interesting point which I think comes out of that also. If I look at things like NBA, we talked about the difference between automating a next best action, then thinking about the larger journey that customers are on. Because if I just have lots of instances of next best actions and no journey, like rather naff for customers, they're not going to like it. So I need to recognize that as we become better at using automation, we start to automate lots of micro decisions, not the big decisions, but little micro decisions. And out of those interactions of lots of little micro decisions, unusual behavior can emerge. Get into a complex adaptive system environment where behavior emerges out of all these interactions, and it might be things that we're expecting, and it probably won't be things we're liking either. So we have to be a little bit careful about doing these experiments and looking at the levels of how we automate things. So that first of all, we learn when to automate when we're able to do so. I mean, back in 1990, Michael Hammer wrote a famous HBR article at the beginning of the re-engineering phase of work, entitled "Re-engineering Work: Don't Automate, Obliterate." I get rid of all the rubbish before we start automating stuff. Same thing applies with our experiments today, with using machine learning and using other artificial intelligence technologies and tools. We need to learn what works first before we start to automate things and take humans completely out of the loop. That's where we are today, I think, in a lot of this stuff.
Right. Automated bad process is just
automated bad decisions, or decisions based on bad data, or we know data collection is riven with a whole load of biases to do with how we do business today, which ends up with biased data. A whole universe of AI ethics and data ethics in the background coming along promoted by the European Union or the UK government. So AI governance is quite a complicated area these days, but that's exactly as important as actually AI itself, or machine learning as a tool to spot better patterns and make better decisions.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The decisions made with AI are conditioned on the practices that we've had previously.
Yeah.
The bias issue. it's a big question. How do we get around it? I don't expect you to solve it for us right now, but how? It would be wonderful if you could. But how do we avoid the inherent bias that comes from decades of particular business practices?
It's a catch-22 question. I think about that. So in terms of, if you do it, you succeed. If you don't do it, it has other challenges as well. So clearly, data has bias in it because of business practices in the past, as you quite rightly mentioned. But there are, I think, emerging best practices or good practices that we can use to cleanse data and remove unnecessary biases. There are guidelines and practices being developed by the European Union, by the ICO, by the Turing Institute in London, by others as well, to help us to work out how we can remove as much bias as is feasible. We'll never get rid of all of it, because that would mean starting off with a complete new set of business practices in an unbiased, inhuman way. But I think there's another question as well, which is, how much bias should we remove? And this is going to sound like a difficult concept, but we are biased by our nature in some good ways and some bad ways. We might be biased against certain groups of people for an unnatural reason, but yet at the same time we are biased towards people who we think are like us, and all for good reasons historically. And that bias will sometimes appear in some of the data. What I am keen to avoid as a user of data, but also from a more philosophical perspective, is a group of people deciding this is how data should be, with a political perspective that's not shared by the vast majority of people. So with a purist approach to bias and removing bias from data that is living up to some unreasonable, unachievable standard that serves nobody other than themselves, rather than trying to find pragmatic solutions, taking out the bias where it's obviously unreasonable and has bad effects. So I'm not an expert in this area, but you read enough about sentencing guidelines in the USA to know there's something sadly broken in how the algorithms work. And if in your opinion, you can challenge those things. If it's an automated decision and it has deleterious effects upon you and what's happening to you, then you can challenge that under GDPR and ask for a human review and the decision to be explained. That's been used quite a number of times in a variety of things as well, and probably will to increase over the time as well. So trying to keep a pragmatic aim and trying to keep it as natural to how people want to behave, rather than setting up this unreasonable philosophical perspective of pure unbiased that we will never realistically have in the real messy, dirty world we live in.
That's a very good point, that we will not ever be rid of bias. I'm depressed now, but I feel
I think getting rid of all bias becomes so cost ineffective. We get rid of half of it costs X, we get rid of another half of that, the next 25% costs double X. We could be getting into the world of diminishing returns. So maybe it's better to have other alternative mechanisms rather than try and make the data itself unbiased. And that looks at making the algorithms unbiased as far as we can, and having oversight and governance over how decisions are made and what they used to decide as well.
And what areas, if any, of artificial intelligence do not need strict governance? Are there things that we can simply leave to the machines at some point?
So I'm not an expert in AI or ML, but I have worked on it for some years now, so I have a perspective. So it goes back to what I said earlier on. So if we think about the humans in the loop, humans out of the loop, except for exceptions, humans out of the loop completely, or in the loop for exceptions, out of the loop completely. If you think back to how we did things in the old ways of process, the old process world, we in a lot of process work in the 1990s. We go there to a corporation, we look at how do you do things, how do you bake a cake, and you find that 10 people have 11 different ways to bake a cake. And over time, you'd find some common good practices, so ways that we work around here most of the time, and experts can help us identify those things. And then you'd find there are some good practices. The way that we've discovered over a long period of time is the absolute best way to do these things. I think the same principles apply to automating decisions, in particular, using machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is We start out by experimenting because we know what it looks like. We learn how things work. We start to create good practices, and we can start to automate elements of those good practices. And over time, when I develop best practices, we know exactly how it's going to work, and things haven't changed recently, then we can automate things fully or more fully because we've learned how to do those things. So I can fly in a big jet from Cologne to London, and the autopilot can run most of that flight and probably could run the landing as well, other than our last parts of it in terms of landing, going towards a sensor under the runway in order to activate the braking. But of course, pilots do a lot of takeoff and landing as well. So we can automate a lot more than probably could do, but we need to be very careful about doing that. They've had probably millions of hours of flying in order to be able to automate big jets over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We're a long way from that in a lot of our applications of AI and ML today. So probably required to have humans in a loop somewhere, probably making decisions, but maybe just having oversight and for exceptions initially.
And just as a comment, there still is no reliable autopilot for helicopters.
Well, it's an entirely different kettle of fish, isn't it? I'm not being a pilot, but it looks a whole lot more complicated. And I've sat in the cockpit of a big jet flying before on a number of occasions. And there's a lot of dials in play, but helicopters are all hands and feet at the same time in a multi-sensory way.
Yeah.
And taking up the perspective you just gave us on fog landing in Heathrow, that indeed is one of the technologies they have established around about 10 years ago, where they nearly completely automatically landed up to the process you precisely said, going into the brake and stopping the machine down, what they can do by automated processes. And we should be aware of how many lines of code it takes to program such an automatism, and that without a human touching the volant, autonomous driving is still a very, very tricky thing.
Yes, indeed, as we've seen recently. But these are the things where things seem to fall over are the edge cases. People stepping out of the sidewalk and with something that looks like the back end of a truck or something, or whatever, or not being recognised at all and causing an accident. So I'm sure these things will sort out in the end. But of course, that goes back to the bias part. The team in the moral machine team at MIT looked at decision making in a so-called trolley problem, whereby you come into a junction. You have to choose: do you swerve and kill yourself, or do you run over the people on the pedestrian crossing? We did a whole interesting experience looking at who they would sacrifice in which circumstances and who's in a relative ranking. And that was fun. So the purists would say everybody's equal. And when the German group sat together to try and identify how they should make rules and regulations and guidance for automated driving in Germany, they naturally took that approach. If you ask people, if you take a normative approach and ask people what they think themselves, they have a very different perspective. And there's a certain pecking order of women before men and children before adults and dogs before cats, and in fact, dogs before criminals. In fact, they wouldn't choose to run over a dog on the crossing or a criminal. People choose to run over the criminal rather than the dog. So, we should never forget that people are not economic maximizers in this case or moral maximizers. They're very complicated and dirty, and we can never forget that we're creating systems that not only should meet certain standards, but also need to be acceptable by the people who are going to choose to make a choice. Would you choose to sit in a self-driving car knowing that it would sacrifice you versus two ladies on a crossing? I wouldn't. I'd refuse to ride in that car.
Perfectly understood.
And a good question to ask. I honestly wonder how I how I would answer that question myself.
Yeah, the MIT guys wrote an article in Nature, which is interesting a few years ago, and then also wrote a book about it afterwards, which I read a little while ago. Very, very interesting expansion of Philip Foot's trolley problem from the 1960s.
Yeah.
Which in itself was a problem to investigate the limits of moral philosophy.
Which comes back to the point, if we are on the philosophical approach, where is the beef, to wrap it up in the perspective? What is your suggestion to put it down on 3 to 5 points where you see the basics in the CRM strategy one should drive for in these times?
That's fine. So I think it comes down to just 3 or 4 things. To keep it simple, first thing is understand everything you can about the customer, the behavior in their context. Because without that, you're talking at the customer, not to the customer when they're in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Second thing is make sure your range of products, propositions, and communications can be constructed in real time, so you can create as close as possible a close match to what customers are looking for when they're in the market. The third thing is you need to use technologies to do all this work. You can't do it any other way. I've tried it the hard way with a telco in Europe with customer lifecycle management. You get to about 60 to 70 different branches on a decision tree. Beyond that, it becomes unmaintainable. So you need to use technologies. So implement technology and use all the features within them, and make sure that people do that. And the last thing I think is we have to recognize that no matter how good we understand customers and how good our product sets are, and our communications are, and how modular they are, but how good our decision technologies are around real-time interaction management, so personalized marketing, community orchestration, or conversational commerce, somebody has to provide governance, make sure we don't do things that damage the brand, damage the relationship, and damage finances. So that governance, that contact governance, is just as important as having a big set of communications available to the marketplace and really good decision technologies. They all 3 need to work in lockstep together. And that's where CRM strategy is today.
Fantastic.
Well said.
Thank you very much. Our still active followers, especially Tony, which interacting with us quite vividly. And thank you very much, Graham, to give us the first round of thoughts on the basics and back to the basics. And we would love to continue that conversation. And now, Ox, we are going backstage, and next time we are back into what is us challenging in the AI approach. If I'm not mistaken, we will then have Michael Wu with us again on that topic. So we take the next round in getting to know some stuff on the AI perspective from his seen from his eyes and views and ears.
From the man in the hat.
Yo. And now we go backstage.